Magnus here, back with another video for you guys. Today we're making a 14th century kidney pouch, so here we go. If you're new here, you should know that I release all the patterns and artwork from my recent builds to both my Etsy shop and my Patreon account, so check those out. Also, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you don't miss any of my videos.
This is a 6-page pattern. I'll actually add to it a little later in this video. So you're going to cut it out. A couple of pieces you have to tape together. Then you just have to choose your leather and get started. I'm going to use a 5.5 ounce oil tan that I had kicking around. It's got good weather resistance. Looks nice. It'll wear nice. This is my most well thought out pattern so far, so I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. My buddy Levi over at Drawbridge Props and Armory, who I share the shop with, he made those weights that I was using there. You never think you'd need something like that until you have it. They're really handy. There's a lot of holes to do, so we're just gonna fly through this really quick. I'm suddenly drawing a blank, but it's either a 5/64 or 3/32 inch punch that I use on these little holes. It's the same size as this 4-in-1 pretty much, which is also the same size as the holes on the pattern. If you're having any trouble punching your holes, it's just taking a while and sticking, it's a good idea just to push your punch into wax a little bit and it'll help you out. Or you can just use this special technique there, that worked really well. This is the front of the pouch just under the front flap. This is where you're going to sew on your extra pouches. We're just going to blow through this really quickly. And then I'm going to decide to do some stop motion animation for some reason because it doesn't take long enough to make a video already. I have fun doing stuff like this, but really I almost need an editor by now so I can pump out more videos for you guys. So I'm using some deer here for these small front pouches and the gusset, and I feel that though it was the right weight, it was way too stretchy for my needs. I think it just pulled too much when I was using the drawstring on it. Don't get me wrong, it's fine. It's just the stretch of the deer makes it so when you pull the drawstring, it's stretching the pouch and not just closing it perfectly. It still looks good. I'm just looking for any improvements always. So once you get this done, you just duplicate it instantly with this finger snap technique. It's always good. Use the weights again, and then we get this gusset cut out. So you'll notice here that this gusset is missing a set of holes that's on the pattern that I made. I'll put a picture of the pattern right here. That extra set of holes will help make sure that your gusset isn't flopping all over the place and maintains its form on the front of your pouch. So I punched a couple holes here, then I decided to use this new technique where you just scrunch up the leather and then put it down again. And it punches all the holes for you. It's kind of a next level of technique, so be careful when you're doing it. It may not work out the first few times. I'm using a very, very small beveler here to get rid of the straightness of all my cuts. I just want it to look a little, not rough, but not like it was made in a factory, you know? So you're stitching front to front on this front piece of the pouch. So the smooth side of my gusset is going against the smooth side of my pouch face. And then I'm going to start back a few stitches and stitch up to the edge and loop over the edge for strength, and then stitch back down and do a running stitch all the way down to the other side and all the way back. Now before you start worrying about the stitching, it's really not that complicated. This is go up into the hole, down into the next hole, back up into the hole. Because this isn't any kind of fancy all-star stitch. This is just running down to the other end, running all the way back, and then we're going to loop it through and tie it off on the inside. We're going to hit it with some fire to melt the thread because it's like a waxed natural artificial sinew, and that's about it. It's going to last for ages. Don't start overthinking the stitching process. And look at it. Okay, there's a loop knot and then another loop knot. These are the only knots. It's just at the end I'm just going to tie two really simple knots as if you're tying your shoes and knot it up. Now we're going to mount our front pouches onto this. You obviously want to mount those pouches before you attach this piece to the back of the pouch. Now there are the same number of holes on the front of the pouch as there are on this drawstring part. What we're doing, because of the spacing, we are creating volume, and it'll give us more pouch space on the inside to put things. So it starts off with the equal separation of holes, and then as it gets closer to the bottom, the hole spacing expands to allow the bottom to have more space. I can imagine some people printing out this pattern and being very confused at the size of this pouch, but trust me, it'll all work out. We're using the same kind of stitching process as we did for the gusset onto the front of the pouch. We're just going to run all the way down and run all the way back, and everything will work out fine. We'll knot it off. Nothing fancy. The only extra thing I would be sure of on this is because the stitching holes are widely placed and it is pleating it or bunching it up, you want to make sure that your stitches are tight. So it's easier to get away with not loose stitches, but not overly thinking the tightness of your stitches on something like the gusset. But on this part, you really want to make sure, especially around the bottom where it's bunching up, that it's nice and firm. So then you can just stitch all the way up to the end and knot it off. Then we're going to burn it and tap it with our finger, hopefully not burn ourselves. Really simple. And then you're just going to make sure you've got two of them. Discovering how easy it is to make two has made my videos a little faster. Now it's time to just stitch the front of the pouch to the back of the pouch. I do a really rough guess on the length of the edge of the pouch and do about 3 times, maybe 4 times that in thread. There's a lot of stitching in this project, so obviously I'm just blowing through certain parts. Just make sure when you start the stitch and you finish the stitch that you end up inside the pouch to protect your thread and cut it off and burn it. So in theory that's it for the edge, but I wasn't really happy with how the front was just kind of hanging off the pouch, and it's not how it would have been done. They would have made sure that was fastened down. So what I'm using is a Glover's needle, which is a sharp leather needle, to go through the hole that's already there for the gusset and then punch through the gusset itself. Now the pattern that I supply has these holes pre-punched. You can use a blunt needle and it'll work just fine. I had to muscle my way along with these pliers to make sure I got it all done perfectly. It turned out good, but I could have saved myself a whole lot of trouble if I had just pre-punched the holes and planned it out a little better. A ways to go still, but it's starting to look like a pouch.
Well, it wouldn't be a Dark Horse video without some leather carving, so we're going to try and put something on this 14th century pouch that isn't too Viking looking. I'll try.
We'll move through this sketch pretty quick. It did end up looking a little Viking-like, but not as much as it could have. I think it turned out pretty nice. I don't think the Norse had a trademark on knotwork. Of course, this artwork is also supplied with the pouch pattern on my Etsy and Patreon if you check it out. So because we're carving it, we're going to use some Vegetan. This is a 5-ounce Vegetan. The heavier your leather, the more depth you can get with your artwork. If you want to do it thinner, that's fine. 5 isn't super heavy, but it's not so heavy that it's going to look out of place on the front of this pouch. Put a nice bevel on it. Wet it. Make sure it's not too wet. You're going to let it dry for a bit. Then we're going to copy your pattern on with a stylus and some tracing film. Smoothly throw in some swivel knife cuts. I'm just going to blow through this really quick. If you want to check out some leather carving and get more of a tutorial feel for it, you can check out this video here. That one's been watched a lot. It's a little older, but it's got all the same techniques as I'm using here. Just going to bevel all my over-unders, and then I'm going to background the whole piece. It turned out pretty nice. Now we need to make a strap. I'm going to make it out of the same leather as I used for the front and back. It's about 19 inches long. Obviously you can adjust it to your liking, put the holes where you want it, put the buckle where you want it. I'm going to use the same leather to make a little strap keeper as well, so we have a place to tuck the tongue after we put it into the buckle. All I'm doing is punching one hole on either side, throwing some sinew in it, tying it, and it's going to get a little deformed when I tie it because of how tiny it is. Then I'm just going to stick some scissors in there or pliers and stretch it out just a little bit to make it more uniform. You could stitch this buckle onto the end if you wanted to. You could use rapid rivets. I just always use brass solid shank peening rivets, which is excessive for most people, but I just like how they look. Yeah. Usually I have no issues keeping the burr down, but because it was being a little annoying, I used a stylus here to push it down while I peened it the rest of the way. Now it's just up to you to decide where you want to put the strap. Take into consideration that the gusset will expand as there's stuff in it, the pouches will expand when there's stuff in it, and so the buckle will move lower and lower on the pouch as it expands. So keep that in the back of your mind when you pick where you want it. Now we're just going to move through some quick hand stitching here before we move on to where we want to put the holes on the strap. Again, you need to think about the pouch expanding and contracting depending on how much stuff is in it. So just use your own best judgment for what you're going to put in it. Three is a good start. I've left the tongue long so that if I have miscalculated, I can definitely add some more. There's room to do that. Now we're just going to add the holes to the flap so we can mount the carving to it. But then first we need to dye the carving after we punch all these holes. I decided just to dye the whole thing red, so it's a nice even color. I don't have to fiddle too much, but then I'm going to paint all the background with this really dark brown, practically black. It's a little tedious, but it's always rewarding. The contrast looks really nice. Now this would be good enough for some people, but I'm going to hit it with a resist, and then I'm going to antique it with a brown. What this will do is get into every single little crack and blend that brown and red just a little bit. Buff it up, burnish the edges really quickly. Now we're going to add our resist and our antique gel, and it'll make it pop really nice. Just make sure it dries until it's not tacky. Throw some gel on there. Ooh, that might be too much gel. Ah, it worked out. And see how it brings everything out? It darkens it just a bit. All those cracks have got brown in them. And it just gives it this nice finished look. Now it's time to mount that carving onto the front of the pouch. I decided to do a running stitch and just alternate back and forth once all the way around because I want the stitches to look a little different. But in the end, my hole count wasn't enough to make it perfect, so there's that tight spot at the top. I changed the pattern after I finished this project, so if you do want to do it like I've done it in this video, you can without having to worry about it bunching up at the end there where I finished the stitch. Now it's time to just make our belt loops by stitching the flap of the pouch and the back of the pouch together. Nice and simple. I start in the middle and go all the way to one edge, and then I go all the way back across the pouch to the other side and then back to the middle. That'll make it nice and strong. Back stitch just a little bit, stitch down between the pieces and tie it off to hide the stitch. Now we need to make our drawstrings for the mini pouches. I used some round lace that I found, but you can use all sorts of lace. I find that the round lace worked well with the stretchiness of these little pouches because I would have preferred for the leather to not be that stretchy. But the round lace is nice and smooth, so it doesn't tug on it too much. You could use any kind of lace, doesn't have to be leather. Whatever works for you. Don't make it too big. Make sure it is able to pull through these holes really easily, or you're just going to have to make bigger holes, which never looks good. Once you've got the lace all the way put through, you want to tie off the ends. You can just knot these ends if you wanted to, or you can do something decorative. I decided to add a little brass bead to the end of them. There's lots of little options you could do, I'm sure. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. There you go, now you can pull the pouch closed with those drawstrings. And then you can pull it open. These little brass beads are great, I'm glad I found them. I'm sure there's all different kinds of closures you could use. The only thing I would do differently on this part of the project is I would have had these a little longer. I would have liked them to dangle down in front of the pouch a little bit more. Fringing the bottoms made it look pretty cool. It would have been nice to have those a little longer as well. And then I knot the bottom so it doesn't fall off, and I knot the top so it doesn't fall off. So in a perfect world, I think it would be nice to have a bead that is friction fit onto your lace. Another option would be to glue it, obviously. Now we just have to do the other side. I decided to do close-up on this side just in case you guys missed some of the process on the first take. Pretty simple. Just make sure you loop alternating back and forth through all the holes, and that your ends of the lace are in a perfect spot for you to pull through your drawstring. So we're getting close to the end. We've got one more part to do. In order for this drawstring pouch to work even better, it really needs a tab on the front of it so you can more easily open it. It's almost done here, but that extra little tab will really help not drive you insane if you're opening and closing the pouch. Looks pretty good though. Alright, so now let's add this tab. This tab is really small. I used the same leather as I did for the front and back, but I skived it slightly. So you may want to find something a little thinner because you want it to be able to bend easily. And all you're doing with this is looping it around the lace at the center and going through every single hole. You stitch off the edge for strength, you go all the way down to one end, all the way back, and you tie it off. It's not as complicated as it looks. You'll see there's only really one way for it to go on that makes any sense. And then you just tie it off, cut it, burn it, try not to burn your fingers. And now you've got a little tab on the front. And now you can easily pull it open and easily close it with the other ends of the lace. Again, I think the ends of the lace should be a little longer, but they worked out pretty good.
Well, that's about it, everybody. Another video in the books. Make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Check out my Etsy or Patreon for the artwork and pattern from this project. And until next time, keep on being creative in whatever it is you do.